Good morning. I really appreciate you taking some time to talk to me.
No problem.
Just to start with, if I can get your name and your job profession or title.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Dr. Brian Birky. I'm Executive Director of the Florida Industrial Phosphate Research Institute.
Okay. And now I did have a question about that. When I started to do my research, I found the Phosphate Institute, and then when I spoke to Heather at Mosaic, she said that you were their go-to person to talk about radiation. Is the Phosphate Institute part of Mosaic, or is it part of Florida, or what did?
Yeah, that's a bit of a complicated story, but it started out 40 years ago as a state agency, just like the Department of Environmental Protection or Department of Health, but it was always attached to some other larger agency within the state university system for administrative purposes, because we have a research purpose. We aren't regulatory or anything like that. So we aren't the industry, we aren't regulators, we do research.
Okay.
About the industry. So, and it's all laid out in law as to what kind of research that we do. So in 2010, we were transferred within a small university. In 2012, we were transferred within a new university. So now we're part of Florida Polytechnic University.
Yeah. So now my first question, just to start out with, because it's a very complicated topic, and I myself have cancer that I battle, so I'm sort of very alert to environmental type of issues where it could be affecting it. So, but to start with, even before we get into sort of the nitty gritty stuff, just what do you think? I mean, from where you sit, what's the biggest misunderstanding that the local activists have or that people have about phosphate mining and the radiation?
Okay. Well, the biggest one is that they don't realize the basic science that everything is radioactive. The universe is radioactive, the planet, and us and everything in it. So it's not like this is radioactive and that isn't. We're all radioactive. So it gets to a matter of degree. So that's the first thing you have to get through to them. And then the second thing is that radiation is a weak carcinogen. It's not very strong at doing this. It's not good at it. So if you look at data from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I mean, those were acute high-level doses of high-energy gamma radiation. And if you look at the survivors, and they followed them over decades, they got about 5% excess cancers. And that's like a worst-case scenario. So when you're talking about low-level environmental radiation, you can't even see the excess cancers. So that makes it very difficult. So we always err on the side of caution. And the principle is that every little bit of radiation dose carries a risk. It may not be true. It probably isn't true at the very low doses. But that's the most cautious way that you can deal with it.
Gotcha. Okay. So yeah, that makes sense to have a sort of a measured approach that way. So 1 second. Let me just grab this. So I know in some of the videos I've seen, you kind of use an example of bananas, since they have some radiation in them. So what, as far as being on, say, like reclaimed land or that type of environment, can you break it down again for us like that?
Yeah. If you eat one banana, and we have to get into radiation units, and they're a little exotic, you will get about 0.1 millisievert of radiation dose. And so if you look at the radiation coming from the lands, then they're about the same range or maybe a little bit higher. So we did have some people who went around recently with their own meters that they bought online, and unfortunately, they didn't exactly know how to use them or interpret them. So they were claiming higher levels than were actually there because they got a number that they could read on the meter, but the meter is not responding correctly to what they really need to measure. So the Department of Health has a Bureau of Radiation Control in the state, and they have very large, expensive arrays of detectors. So instead of a little tiny thing in your hand, they've got these big things that they mount on trucks that are solid crystal detectors that can stop gamma radiation very easily. That means it can detect it very well. And they can take thousands of measurements by just driving around with it. And they found levels that were much lower than what the people were claiming. So, you get people who, sure, their intentions are good, but they aren't experts in the field. So they can make mistakes, and then they put it out, and then it has to be responded to.
So the results from this test, did the public have those available to them?
It was given, the request was from Hardy County, where they were running around taking measurements. So that's something that made it into the public record and county commission meetings. Okay. So that's available. And the others, they did run around in Polk County, which is a neighboring county. And they were looking at one particular museum site, and a study had already been done there. So that was available too.
So, okay, and this is actually a perfect thing to talk about, because when I was down there, I was able to meet up with a couple people that have the Geiger counters. And we went to this rock pile that was in Hardy Lakes Park. And it registered over 500 clicks, or what would it be considered? Clicks per minute, or
Counts
CPM?
Per minute.
Counts per minute, yeah. And the microsieverts were very high. Can you kind of help me understand those numbers? I mean, like I said, we had 500, which seemed outrageous.
That's what I was talking about with not knowing how to use the meter.
And so just to sort of say then, so in your mind, or from what your experience is, are there any health complications to what's happening radiation-wise in that area?
The doses are so extremely low that the most probable outcome is that nothing happens. And you can go to the Health Physics Society. They put out position papers, and they say that a dose of 10 rem, the whole body, which is twice the annual exposure allowed to a radiation worker, still the most probable outcome is that nothing will happen. So now we're talking about fractions of that. So it's most likely that nothing will result from that. The one thing that we pay attention to is radon gas buildup in homes, because radon gas has been linked to cancers in underground miners. Of course, they have extremely high exposure levels, not like you would have in a home, but it's still a clue that maybe you want to limit that. And the EPA came out with guidelines on that. They don't have a strict limit, they just have guidelines. So that's what you do.
Gotcha. Okay. So you don't find any correlation between the mining activities and any form of cancer rates or anything like that in the areas?
No, you don't. And actually, since radon is the highest dose thing and the thing that we want to pay the most attention to, one time we did do a study at our institute and looked at the areas that will have the potential for the highest radon doses. That means they have the most uranium in the ground. So it's uranium, then radium-226, and then radon-2. So you're looking at those, and the gas comes up into the homes. If it's trapped, then the daughter products, as it decays, will build up in the home. And they're the ones that you want to be concerned about, because those particles will attach to dust. You breathe them in, and now you've got something emitting radiation inside you. It's not external where it's going to hit your protection. It's inside where it can hit some more sensitive things. And then it's much more important. So that's what you want to look at. So we did a study where we looked at the areas with the highest radon potential, and then looked at the counties that had the highest cancer rates. And you would think those two, if they're highly correlated, will overlap. And they didn't overlap. So, and that's a kind of study that's been done. It's done in Ireland. It's been done around the world in different places, and it never matches up. So it's just a different scale than the miners got.
Okay, gotcha. Because I mean, that's one thing I did find is that Hardy County has their number one, according to the Department of Health, the number one cause of death is cancer. And
Yeah,
I
Hardy
thought there's so
County
much
was
mining there.
yeah, Hardy County was one of those counties. Of all the counties in the state, and you look and do this assessment, Hardy was one of them that stood out. Well, there could be a correlation, but Hardy's also a poor county, so healthcare isn't that great, and you have a lot of smokers there. So that's the problem with epidemiology studies. You have a lot of confounding variables that you can't control.
Can you kind of help me understand that a little bit? From what I understood, for a while they would take their uranium found extraction process and then able to sell it through government contracts as propellant or yellow cake or.
Yeah, they would go to a cake product, and be yellow or green cake. What they would do is the uranium that's in the phosphoric acid that they create here to make fertilizers, it's a trace level. It's really fine. So they have to go through, a series of solvent extraction steps to concentrate it and get it out. So it's not a cheap or easy process. They don't really want to do it unless the uranium prices are really high. And for them, what I've seen of the industry, they make enough money off of phosphate that they're really not that interested in getting it out. For sustainability, we would like to see them get it out. And for global warming, I would like to see them get it out as a fuel and use it more. But that's what we're stuck with. So right now, we have a project to look at uranium extraction, but while you're extracting other things. So also there are rare earth elements that go through. And rare earth elements are used in your car. They're used in all of the green technology. So that's something that we would want to get out because China has complete control of the rare earth market. It's also used in defense technology. So that's important. We'd like to get that out. And at the same time, if we can recover uranium and more of the phosphate that's lost to make the process more efficient, then that would be a good thing.
So it would just be used mostly for, for just local, power plants, or they'd have.
No, the uranium, if they did extract it again, would be subject to the market sales rates, depending on who was doing it.
And when did they stop? Weren't they were doing uranium for a while, and then it evidently quit?
Yeah, they had two waves of it. The first wave was defense, and that was all the way back to the 50s. And in the 70s, they had this wave for power. And then shortly after that, and some of them ran into the 80s, but then they stopped and they decommissioned all of them. So if they wanted to start it up again, they would have to make brand new facilities to do it.
Could you kind of explain that as well? I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, and it all goes to the UN sustainability goals. You want to not have waste streams. You want to use materials. And this is gypsum. So gypsum is useful. You can use it in all kinds of construction and agriculture activities. And phosphogypsum that they produce in this phosphoric acid manufacture has a little residual phosphate value from losses in the process. So, that's an extra boost to plants if you use it in agriculture. So you can use it for a variety of things. It's just that in the U.S., the EPA mandates that you must stack the phosphate. And there's very little opportunity to use it from the stack. So it's very difficult. The rest of the world, they're using more and more and more of it.
No, those stacks are it's the same one that there was the sinkhole problem in 2016, right? Okay.
Yeah, and that was the New Wales stack. I think 215 million gallons of acidic water went down into the aquifer. So that was a big loss. Of course, they pumped it out, and they're still pumping it out. But that was a big breach, and that's one of those things in Florida. We have a lot of sinkholes. If you look at the lakes on a map, a lot of them tend to be round because they're actually sinkhole in origin. So everywhere in the state is at risk for a sinkhole, including where they put these stacks. And one of the things they've talked about recently is trying to find better ways to prospect and see if there might be a weakness under an area where they want to put a stack or they already have a stack.
Yeah, no, I understand. It's kind of more speculative like that. So a couple other things that I've heard, and I was hoping maybe you could just help them clear them up for me, are some of the byproducts that people have told me that come through the phosphate. And so I'm just kind of curious if we can address those maybe a little bit. Fluoride is a big one, where people talk about it being the fluoroacetic acid, I believe, the byproduct of that. Is that something that you would consider as a safe element? I know that they sell it as fluoride to a lot of the municipalities.
Yeah. There you're going to have people that's one of those issues that's like a hot topic, and people say, don't fluoridate my water. It's a control issue. I don't want my water fluoridated. And, and then there are other people that say, it helps my teeth. I don't care. So, yeah, it's one of those things. They do recover it. It does go into water supplies to fluoridate the water. Is there any consensus on it? I mean, that's a good public health agency question, but it's being used and they aren't stopping it.
A lot of confusion over white phosphorus, like it for weapon grade.
Yeah, we don't have that here. We don't produce that. So.
All right. It's just pure fertilizer and then a little bit of uranium left over, huh? And then fluoride or whatever.
Amount, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the uranium that isn't extracted goes out in the fertilizer. And that's another thing.
Oh no, we're frozen. Oh no. Can you hear me?